Hello. Hello. This is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me, so my introduction's here. Feedback is greatly important. Alright, you got questions, comments, concerns, show ideas, feel free to reach out to me. You can do that. And the sources I will provide for you will be in this link. Alright, so some of the audio platforms that I'm on. I'm on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Pandora, just to name a few. And also, to add on to this, I'm working on my Shopify. And look out for that link too. I'll include that probably on Friday. But if not Friday, definitely on Monday. Next Monday. All right. So, this episode is all about. So I'm going to break this down. This is the first part of it, and I'll continue it out on Wednesday. So what I'm going to focus in on here is adaptations, and specifically in the aspects of talking about first comic books. Right, a comic book. Specifically with this comic book, what I'm going to talk about is Preacher. And then I'm going to relay that to Quentin Tarantino and his aspects of pulling and incorporating different iconic images and culture into his movies in a subliminal way, in a subtle way, and talk about how those things relate to one another. Here we go. Okay, so Preacher. So this comic is really, that's the good thing about comics when they get into the aspects of talking about and relaying to serious topics and trying to get touch on the subject in a way that's either hyperbole or within the hyperbole you not only read but you see it all playing out and all unfolding in itself. So the aspects of religion and culture, and how that's placed in society is one of those things that is not all wildly neat and wrapped up nicely in a package with a big bow on top sometimes here. And why am I saying this? Because it's unfortunate, but people have their own ideas when it comes to the aspects of religion and their self within the placement of religion. So this means this could either be good or bad. But unfortunately, for the most part, the bad outweighs the good. So what does that mean? That means, with historically speaking, the aspects. I touched on this before, but I'll go in more depth about it. The aspects of imperialism. So when we get into the world, the unified organized religions with Christianity, Catholicism, we get into the aspects of Islamic, Muslim, with the Quran and everything. That religion, and then you go into the Eastern philosophies and so forth here. And so it's just that's the hand in the fight with that idea that superiority ranks other things here. And so what that means for instance, when we get into the aspects of Islamic cultures, when women have their heads wrapped up, and when you have to be a certain way, think a certain way, feel a certain way, and the aspects of that's emplacing the aspects of I have to be as pure as I can be, or better than the above the rest. Now, I'm merely speaking from my point of view, and those who listen to me, feel free to chime in and give me your thoughts about this. And so, to the point that I have to showcase these aspects of how pure I am to the religion, how devoted I am, and then the others that don't show this following are subordinate to me or not as devout as me, and there's a problem or a distinct breakdown of the aspects of who is better, so to speak, in their walk of faith. And now this is relayed into other religions too in subtle ways, but it's all syncing around the same thing, the aspects that unfortunately comes with religion, with spirituality. In a nutshell, from my point of view, is this: trying to find and showcase how that outweighs the whole center purpose of spirituality. Is supposed to uplift you, to understand and humble you down to where you get the point that there's something greater than us all, and then we're all in the pursuit of understanding that balance in order to find peace and understanding within our own lives. And so in that pursuit, this is unfortunate that outweighs the aspects of being more superior and showcasing how more devoted you are by separating yourself from others. Now in Preacher, this comic, it touches on those subjects in a very viscerally apparent way. So what am I saying about this? So, you get the concepts of, which is typical with comic books specifically around this time, and then, before and then, with the violence and all this. But you also get the breaking down of the aspects of talking about the placement of imagery and figures that are associated with Christianity. When you talk about the aspects of how angels fall in line and the placement of their roles to God and to the placement of man that's covered in preacher. And then when you get into the aspects too of the main character preacher and how he is called back to what was deemed and what he was perceived into in the aspects of taking on the I don't know why I'm tongue-tied with this. The priority of the father to the son, and that the aspects of you getting that overarch storyline of the sins of the father is related to the placement or displacement of the child, in this case the son. Yeah. And so but it's the way that it's presented in a comic book, you slowly and gradually get into the backgrounds of all of these characters here. And so you which is really good about comics, the writers, most of them make a point to leave things open-ended so you can kind of start to draw a conclusion about something, but then slam you down with something unexpected to where you don't know what's going to happen next here. And so that can be really jarring too when you get in the aspects of religion and culture when you're talking about these things in these sort of graphic means here. And then with historically talking about stuff that is interlaced into preacher, it overarches the ideas and the themes of sin and humanity, of how those things break down itself and try to resurface again to the aspects that that circle of healing, in the process of healing and finding salvation is never truly over because of the outward forces of evil resurfacing itself. So that never-ending fight for against light and dark and all of this. And then when you also get into the aspects too, when there's specifically comic books that center around religion and how they present themselves in the form, it also relates a lot to the aspects of the traditional meaning of comic books here. From my point of view, that comic books mostly is centered around Greek mythology. And so when you get into the aspects of breaking down how within Greek mythology here, it's all about the aspects of how sin overcomes and wipes away the immense nobility of the Greek figure. And then you get in that never-ending cycle, which superheroes, overall storylines, superheroes are based on the aspects of that tier of Greek storylines of that Sisyphus ever arcing ideas of, you have this figure, God, goddess. Something happens to where it breaks down the structure of their moral compass, and because they give in, or because something happens out of the circumstances of themselves, because of something else forces out of their control, they're in a never any perpetual cycle of starting over again or trying to find a new, until that overall circumstance defines which way path they want to go into. And I just think that when there are comic books that center themselves around religion, you can really see that's very apparent that they're talking about and delving into the aspects of Greek mythology here. And so that's one thing. Now, relating to the aspects of adaptations and culture. Now, with the television series Preacher, it was quite interesting, and I'll get all these things that I'm talking about. I'll go into even more depth on Wednesday here. So they pretty much went into a way of storytelling into where I think that what they were trying to do is make it more neater, in order to get the concept and relay the concept in a concrete way to get people to, understand it, generally, and then reach out and see it from an abstract point of view here. And so, it's apparent for the main character, he is a con person, in the television series. And so, it starts out where he's in this small Texas town here, and he's a preacher, and he's trying to, he's just going about his day to day. And then you see it translates to these other figures and how they're engaged in things that are just super gore, really violent. And you're like, how does this relate to this preacher? What's going to happen with this? And then you see the overarching tones of the angels, and they're related to him too, and how they all come together and unify itself to tell the story even more and pull out the overall themes of the story. And so that's one thing. And then how it also breaks down and talks about the aspects of God and the breaking down of the imagery of, there's a strong possibility that there really is no higher being, or on the reality, the other side of that the aspects of God and religion and all of this, that giving up so much to where was the point, and it goes on he goes on with his own life and he's just out trying to figure all that out. That's a very radical concept here. And it's quite interesting when these things come into play in mainstream culture, and it gathers an audience and people start to think about these concepts and the complexities within that. And that is a testament to how valuable the arts, the literature is to the fabric of society, because in itself, it does really, really key in and clue in to the mentality within that culture, within that state of consciousness of how people think about themselves within their society, whether they're against it too, and on the other aspect, if they're against it too or for it, it both says they're both different, but they both say the same thing about their point and value of how they see the world around them. Now I'm going to end talking about Quentin Tarantino. Now, Quentin Tarantino, his films, excuse me just a minute. His films, his impact, his mark on society is very apparent. Say what you will about him. He has, a lot of controversy within himself with his mystique. But, his work, specifically, when you get in the aspects of culture, he really placed his marks on society. So, what do I mean by this here? Alright, so, anywhere from Kill Bill to Pulp Fiction, to True Romance, the list goes on. They have set up unique circumstances, and to where when you look at these films, or as somebody is talking to you about them, if you have never seen them before, or you see clips of it, it gives a visual art into. It goes beyond the concept of what cinema can bring and talk about and think about when it comes to storylines here. He really was a trendsetter when it comes to stuff like that. And so it's quite interesting too that a lot of the concepts that are involved in his storylines has to do with other cultures or other cinematic storylines that have been set into place and that were masterpieces, and he is trying to relay it into the aspects of how that is thought about from a contemporary sense, or thought about from a sense of from an American point of view, or Americana here. And so, for instance, he was really, really good about the aspects of conversational pieces here. So you notice that throughout really all of his characters, when they're conversating, you really get a structuralized understanding of who these characters are, and you get more engaged with it, because that happens a lot of the times in cinema, where people are talking, but it's not really taking the story anywhere. But how they speak and what they're saying to each other, it drives the story to the next point. And that's quite interesting, because that relates to the aspects of what goes on in real life when somebody is saying something to someone, or they having conversations. A lot of the times most of the times it's meaningful, and that what they're saying to each other affects the next step that happens, or the sequence of events that follows after with the conversations here. And so it's quite interesting enough that he had, for instance, Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction, traditionally, stories that were written, they were just cheap dime store story plots. Was, nothing to scratch your head over. It was just, cheap, printed on cheap material, and the storyline was easy to follow, and it was just something like a, aftermath to read, or so forth, to follow through. As far as literature, it's not, some great masterpiece. But Quentin Tarantino flipped his head more ways than one with the concept of Pulp Fiction, by having these interlaced storylines that are interwoven to each other, to where it changes the concept of the aspects of what can be done, or what is thought about when people have the concept of pulp fiction here. And it's just it's something to wrap your mind around, because it goes backwards. It starts from the end to work its way back to the beginning, to prove the point of what is ended is what explains what was started. And then there's some say, well, that when you, specifically if you're in the entertainment industry, and specifically in filming, it's much easier to film out of order and then bring the storyline together to see how it flows. And that could be another concept that's working itself within the Quentin Tarantino storyline. That's something to think about too. Now, when you get into Kill Bill and other storylines like that, it really draws into the aspects of culture, specifically with Asian culture, and the aspects of the delicate mastery of war, and balance between war and peace, and how that plays out with each other. And you see that playing a pivotal role in the Kill Bill series here. Now I'm going to end and talk about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Now, this was his last, I don't know if he's going to make any more movies, but this sort of his different concept of talking about Hollywood. And if I'm not mistaken, he was saying this was a love note to Hollywood, his aspects of how, specifically in this era of time, of how things were presented, and how, particularly television and movies played a part within themselves here. And all these characters are quite different in the film version than in the book version. And it's one of the stuff he also did that quite well about making a point of something being in the metaverse or a story within a story, the concept of the Shakespearean, mentality of telling, of writing, of telling a story plot. So the fact that he wrote the book Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and he purposely decided to make the characters different from the book within the movie, he's also proven another point of how meta that is, that what goes wrong with the aspects of film and adaptation, they tend to merge and lose their translation and language and display in the displaying of characters and how they have a rich developed identity and the literary form of their characters of each character, and then when that's translated to film, it's lost because it's something completely new. And then the language doesn't form in your mind if you read the book versus seeing the film, and you feel like you don't really know what it is anymore, and the identity is lost within that character, and you feel shortchanged. And that one is in itself places a lot of value in the culture of the aspects of how powerful literature can be, and to the mind frame of how the written word, cultivates an identity of what these themes are about. And within that, you really start to appreciate the artistry within what the written word can be. And I think that Quentin Tarantino doing something like that really, drives that home with the aspects of how important that is to understand that you have to take the time to, if you're going to take on a project, to try to be very delicate and take the time to make it right. And that's another interesting concept too. All right, so I like to know what you all think. Feel free to reach out to me. And like I said, I'm going to go into even more depth on Wednesday about this. All right, so this reaches the end of the Harboring Light. Tune in, turn up, and absolutely take care. Bye-bye. For now, take care.